Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, subpoenas in the Epstein probe, plus the Voting Rights Act turns 60, and bringing comfort to kids in tragedy by replacing lost toys. Republicans on the House Oversight Committee announced yesterday they have subpoenaed a number of top Democrats and former federal law enforcement leaders to appear for depositions in their Jeffrey Epstein probe. They include former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I spoke with USA Today domestic security correspondent Josh Meyer for more. Hiya, Josh.
Hey, Taylor.
All right, so who are some of the folks, Josh, being subpoenaed here and why them?
It's a wide range of people. It's Democrats and Republicans, but they are focusing, this is the House Oversight Committee, they are focusing on a lot of Democrats. They're including Attorney Generals Merrick Garland from the Biden administration, Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch from the Obama administration, also Bill Barr, Jeff Sessions from the first Trump administration, and Alberto Gonzalez from the George W. Bush administration. So they're going pretty far back, which tracks with the timeline of the allegations in which Jeffrey Epstein's accused of trafficking young girls with the help of Ghislaine Maxwell, allegedly.
And Josh, just to understand here, they're also subpoenaing the Justice Department itself, correct? As part of this?
They are subpoenaing the Justice Department itself. Importantly, they're also subpoenaing former President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, and also FBI Director James Comey, his predecessor, Robert F. Mueller. You know, they say they're doing this to get to the bottom of the whole Epstein scandal and to find out what taxpayers and the public need to know.
Well, you touched on it there. I mean, is that what this committee is really hoping to accomplish from all this testimony?
Yeah, what James Comer said, he's the Kentucky chairman of the committee. The subpoenas seek testimony, quote, related to horrific crimes perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein, unquote. And so they're looking for whatever kind of documentation they can from that, from the Justice Department, which has responded to me and said that they have no comment on that, but that they have received the subpoena. So it remains to be seen whether DOJ will cough up these documents or not.
And Josh, at the time of recording, have we heard any other reaction from any of those other folks who were tapped to testify here? Will they play ball?
I haven't seen that. I assume everybody's busy lawyering up. As one person put it on X on social media, you know, half of the town's lawyers are probably hiring the other half of the town's lawyers in this. So we don't have any responses yet, but I'm on the lookout for them.
And Josh, just more broadly stepping back, I mean, what does all this mean for this conversation we've been having in recent weeks around Epstein documents and the Trump White House?
That's a good question, Taylor. I mean, basically, Trump campaigned on a platform. Part of this platform was to release the Epstein documents and finally get to the bottom of this. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of accusations that people in power, that VIPs were somehow consorting with Jeffrey Epstein on his Caribbean island, on his jet, in his house in Manhattan to sexually assault and rape underage girls. And so there's been a real effort by the MAGA movement, Trump's movement, to get to the bottom of this. And so when last month the FBI and the DOJ said that they weren't going to release any more documents, there was a real uproar about that. So, you know, I think this is part of the effort to sort of contain that controversy and show that they're being responsive to it.
All right. Josh Meyer covers domestic security for USA Today. Thanks, Josh.
My pleasure.
President Donald Trump said athletes hoping to compete in the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games in Los Angeles will be tested to prevent transgender participants in women's sports such as boxing. Trump signed an executive order in February aimed at barring transgender student athletes from participating in women's sports. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee later changed its rules to prevent participation by transgender women, citing Trump's executive order. And earlier this week, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services issued policy guidance preventing trans women from receiving extraordinary ability visas to compete in women's sports. Trump's comments about testing athletes came after he signed an executive order to create a White House Olympics task force to handle security and other issues related to the 2028 Games. He also said he might call in National Guard troops and other members of the U.S. military to assist with security efforts at the Olympics. The Voting Rights Act turns 60 today. I caught up with USA Today national correspondent Deborah Barfield-Berry to discuss its legacy and how some advocates worry the law's protections are now at risk. Deborah, how are you today? Thanks for joining me as always.
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thanks for hopping on. So I just want to start by going back to the Voting Rights Act itself. They're 60 years on. Just remind us what this act was, what it did, and what some of the work was that helped make it happen.
So the 1965 Voting Rights Act came about in part because civil rights activists and others pushed hard for voting right protections. Much of that work happened in the South, in the Deep South, but there was everything from sit-ins to protests to demonstrations and all kind of measures, oftentimes against some violent pushback. But they pushed hard just to make sure that there was more access to voting for everybody. And that's how it came about. Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law on August the 6th, 1965. I had a chance to talk with Cortland Cox, who was a veteran of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was one of the activists who was on the ground in the South doing the work, helping register Black people to vote. So if anybody has some insight into what it took to get the act passed and talk about what has happened in the years since, Mr. Cox was one of those people. And he was real passionate about protecting the Voting Rights Act and what it means. And even more passionate, though, about making sure the fight continues and that the next generation is ready to, as he put it, make sure there's some political organizing to make sure everyone is involved in making sure this law is protected.
And Deborah, what has been achieved since then?
Many people point to several achievements since then in the 6 decades, and that is, in some places, there are a record number of African Americans voting. There are a record number of African Americans serving in some legislatures. There are a record number of people of color in Congress. And then, for the first time ever, a Black woman, a woman of African American and Asian descent, served as vice president, and she ran for president. So many people point to those kind of measures of success of the Voting Rights Act.
And in terms of just what you heard from advocates, Deborah, what are some aspects that are still falling short?
Many of them have raised some concerns about what they call some of the rolling back of protections, whether it be under the Civil Rights Act or whether it be under the Voting Rights Act. They're worried about some of the states which have adopted some more restrictive voting rights laws. They're worried about even under the Voting Rights Act itself. The Supreme Court had a decision in 2013 that basically, for the most part, eliminated a key provision of the act, which for the most part made sure that states with a history of discrimination had to go through the Department of Justice before they could implement any changes. Without that, they say that some states are kind of going doing their own thing. In many cases, it means that the laws are more restrictive.
And specifically, Deborah, under this Trump administration, what are they worried about as it pertains to the Voting Rights Act?
There's a list of concerns they have under the Trump administration, especially when it comes to voting. And that is that Republicans will argue, have argued, and actually introduced a bill that they say will do a better job of protecting the integrity of the system or pushing back against voter fraud. Some of the advocates argue that there hasn't been much evidence to prove much of those allegations or charges, and that, if anything, some of the steps they've taken close the doors for some people, limit access for some people, get rid of ballot boxes in some areas, change the time periods for early voting, and those kind of changes that actually would decrease access for folks, perhaps even turn some folks off from voting, scare some folks away from voting. And then even more so, they're worried that much of the provisions in the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act require enforcement from the Department of Justice. Some will argue that the Department of Justice, especially the Civil Rights divisions, are being gutted and that they're doing less of a job of enforcing those laws. And so there's much concern about who's going to watch.
Well, Deborah, today marks the 60th anniversary of this landmark act. How are advocates and others marking the anniversary this year?
The Civil Rights Act was considered one of the crown jewels of the civil rights movement. So many of the advocates, lawyers, scholars have been studying, of course, the act, but there have been a lot of programs and panels leading up to this because it is a big deal. It's the landmark legislation. It was huge. It changed the face of the country, changed the face of democracy in the country. So folks have been doing all kinds of things to make sure they commemorate and honor and make sure people remember just what it took to get the Voting Rights Act, and some caution, make sure there's a fight to make sure they protect what the Voting Rights Act is about and protect it for the next generation.
Deborah Barfield-Berry is a national correspondent with USA Today. Folks can find the full version of this story with a link in today's show notes. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
The implosion of the Titanic-bound submersible in June of 2023 that killed 5 people was preventable, fueled by its inadequate design and a toxic workplace culture, according to a newly released Coast Guard report. The report out yesterday found that Titan imploded because the factor is largely in the hands of the company that operated it, OceanGate. They include OceanGate's inadequate design, certification, maintenance, and inspection process for the submersible. You can read more, including a more exact timeline of Titan's final moments, with a link in today's show notes. Kind Time is back to give you a story that stuffs some comfort in the middle of crisis. A child life specialist from New Jersey knows the value comfort items can bring to a child. She found a way to help those kids who have lost their snuggly friends after a catastrophic event. Seth Carnell shares more about the Lost Stuffy Project.
After watching the devastation from the LA wildfires, Randy Jaffe was inspired to create the Lost Stuffy Project in an effort to support children and families who had lost their comfort items due to similar tragedies.
They lost their schools and communities and their homes, but they didn't have anything to comfort them. And I thought, hey, it would be really cool to figure out a way for us to connect them to those items that they lost.
Some items are easy to find. Others that are discontinued or uniquely made are more difficult. Luckily, the project has amassed an army of over 37,000 resourceful Instagram followers.
That might be like the coolest part of this whole thing, is just seeing how much it's inspired other people and giving other people the opportunity to help during catastrophic times. Even if it's a small way, it's a way of really being able to make a difference.
Recently, a little girl was the recipient of this movement after attending Mystic Camp during the tragic Texas floods.
She had taken her stuffed doggie with her when she evacuated her bunk, and she was airlifted and rescued, and the stuffed animal got lost along the way, and she was devastated. So we were able to replace it within like 2 days. We got it back to her, which was pretty amazing because it was discontinued, but we were able to find it. A couple days after that, they found the original one at the camp.
And coming up later today, our forests are home to some of the oldest living organisms on Earth, but they're facing a variety of threats, from climate change to wildfires.
The fact is that our ecosystems are dealing with these profound legacies of the way they've been managed in the past, these profound threats and stressors in the present, and then this future that promises challenges like never before.
That's forester and author Ethan Tapper. This week, we revisit our conversation with him and his book, How to Love a Forest. You can hear his talk with my colleague Dana Taylor right here on this feed today, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.